Hello, and welcome to our launch of Savannah and Her 13 Moons, and our focus later in the event on our other publication, Stormlight by Jan Wolfe. I'm delighted that we at Rivers Meet are able to participate in this alongside of Bookmarks. We're very, very honoured to be working this evening. And I'd just like to welcome people. I can see in the chat already, we've got people here from Devon, people here from San Francisco, people here from London, from Toronto, and from Belfast. And I'll keep everybody posted as we go along as to where in the world we're touching next. So I'm going to start by telling everybody just a little bit about what we're going to do this evening. The first part of the evening is focused on Shaun Traynor's wonderful collection of poems, Savannah and Her 13 Moons. We'll start with an introduction to that by Richard Bradbury from Rivers Meet. Unfortunately, we can't have Shaun with us this evening. He's not well enough to be with us, but I know he's very much looking forward to hearing and seeing this presentation this evening and our launch. So I'm going to hand over to Richard, who's going to introduce the book. And a quick visual aid. Here's the book itself. It's a very small collection written for Shaun's granddaughter Savannah, and you'll see a bit more of the book later on. But for now, Richard's going to introduce it.
Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us this evening. It's a real pleasure to be introducing not just Shaun's book, but Shaun himself. And I wanted to begin by saying a little bit about Shaun and his work. Shaun was born in Derry and said of himself, I was born an Ulster Protestant and brought up in that faith and culture. But even from an early age, I felt a discontent with the strictness and narrow vision of that culture. As a young man, I left Northern Ireland to live in London, and so began to realise that I did have a basic human right to think things through for myself. I determined I would not be what that society which I had left tried to make me and wished me to be. Basically, insular and conformist. And I think anyone who knows Shaun, anyone who's read his work will know that the last two words we'd ever apply to him are insular and conformist. Shaun arrived in London following in the footsteps of many another Irish person, and in the great tradition of Irish migrants to this country, started off by getting a job on a building site. And one of his earliest, and I think one of his very best poems, is called A Labourer's Lament from the Hardening Ground. And it's a wonderful poem because it jumps the boundary between what we think of as manual work and mental work. And in the poem, the work of building houses becomes the work of building poems. It's just extraordinary poem, and I'm very pleased to say if you go onto YouTube, you can not only watch the video of this performance this evening, but you can also watch a video of Shaun reading A Labourer's Lament. Over the years, Shaun's work has divided really into two streams. One, all the books for young people, which includes the Pool book of Irish poetry for children, a large number of short poems for children, and a couple of novels, and also a series of poetry collections. And I just want to focus on those poetry collections for a minute, because they're works that have a directness to them, which is in some circles very unfashionable in modern poetry. People love to be unnecessarily arcane in their writing. Shaun has a wonderful directness, which is that directness though is never simplistic. And Terry Eagleton, the critic, said of his work that it was open, direct, unedged. His feelings immediately and clearly rendered. His dictions and rhythms simple. And I want to stress that because Shaun's work is both very direct, very unsimple, but also written in a language that can sing when it needs to. And those are, I think, qualities that come to Shaun's work from being an Irish poet. He stands, I think you can see in his work, echoes of Pat Kavanagh and Seamus Heaney. But I want to draw a distinction between Shaun's work and Pat Kavanagh's and Seamus Heaney's, because all three of them have an extraordinary sense of place and an extraordinary sense of people. But in Shaun's work, there's a move away from the rural sensibility you get in Seamus and Pat's work towards an urban awareness. And I just want to read a little bit from one of Shaun's poems to illustrate that. It's from a poem called Vauxhall Cross, from a collection called Van Gogh in Brixton. I must somehow attempt to make permanent what I witnessed today. A battered van stopped at the lights. I was in my own car, battered, in 5 lanes of overheating stationary traffic. I glanced across and saw 2 workmen. Their vehicle indicated they were Southwest plumbers, a driver and his companion. I saw them suddenly slump back in their seats, their heads lolling back as if their necks were broken, like battery hens at the end of their working life. They lay overall-clad corpses, laid out mummified, completely knackered by work. I suppose the Tories who had set the scene, and New Labour who gratefully accepted it, could take succour from this vignette. Men in work, exhausted by work and the backdrop, the glorious backdrop, the new MI6 building, rising like an empire. Great piece of work. Shaun's work really is collected into 4 collections of work: the Hardening Ground, Images in Winter, and more recently Van Gogh in Brixton, and last of all a little poem I'll come back to in a moment. And there's as well as a directness and sharpness about the work. There's also, I'm sorry, it's a student's phone ringing in the background, which I can't switch off. There's a largeness of heart about Shaun's work, which has been there, I think, both in the poetry, but also in the man himself. From the very first day we met, I had this sense that this was an extraordinarily generous and open man who can also be extremely funny when funny is needed. I just want to say talk briefly just about one more poem, which is Shakespeare's Last Drink. Because in Shakespeare's Last Drink, I think Shaun combines a real sense of a poetic and dramatic tradition with the realization that death all too often can be simply commonplace. Shakespeare dies after a night out drinking with 2 mates. And yet he fills that recognition with an emotion and a further recognition, really, that the writing survives beyond the poet himself. And I just want to read the beginning of Shakespeare's Last Drink. It was one of those misty April nights, as if the whole sky were waiting. The hedgerow was heavy with bullants and coltsfoot. Plague hung on every tree's branch and breath. In the Bell at Welford, Drayton sipped a glass of Rhenish wine. Johnson was already at the pints. They talked of prosperity, the price of folios, anticipated Shakespeare. He'll be here in a minute. The last thing I want to say really about, very particularly, I just want to move on to talk very quickly about both the actual poems in Savannah and Her 13 Moons, but also about the book itself. I was somebody who grew up reading Germano Facetti's Penguin editions with those fantastic covers that really brought the content of the book to life. And one of the things one of our ambitions with Riversmeet Press is to produce books that look beautiful, like that, in which the visual content coincides with the text. And I think absolutely that Roloff's design for Savannah works beautifully well. And I just want to say now very quickly something about Savannah and Her Moons before we move on to hear some of the poems being read. Shaun conceived the book as a series of poems written, one for each full moon of a year, written for Savannah, his granddaughter, published on Facebook during 2019, and now gathered together in this little book. And I think publishing it now, a year after the last poem was written, there's a poignancy to the poems that grows out of the experience we've all had this last year, because for so many of us, the year has given us the chance to think about the world, to contemplate quietly the world around us. And these short, crystalline poems are a perfect complement to that. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Richard. I'd like to kind of welcome a whole number of people who I can see have come in on the comments post. We've got people here from Poland, as well as the United States and Canada, and from, as I said, from Belfast. I'd very much like to welcome Ursula, who's with us tonight, and hope you really enjoy what we're doing. I did have there's a question came in which I'm not sure I know the answer to, but kind of family members who may be listening might have the answer to, as to whether there was a particular moment which inspired the writing of Savannah, or what led Shaun to decide to do this, whether it was something he'd been doing along the way with his granddaughter. That's not something that I know. It might be something we'll ask him, but it'd be great if any family members who are with us know the answer to that and could put something in the chat comment. We've also got somebody here from South Africa, I see, which is fantastic. We're going to move now to a series of readings of the poems, which we've pre-recorded. And you'll see each of the 6 poems that's being read. You'll see the page of the book that it's coming from, which will give people a sense of what the book looks like in detail, which I hope you'll enjoy as much as hearing the reading. So I'll pause there, and hopefully our technical whiz in the background, Dave,
Savannah
will be able
and her 13 Moons
to show the reading.
By Shaun Traynor.
February, the snow moon. The snow moon is so named because historically February is the snowiest month in America. It's also traditionally referred to as the hunger moon because hunting was very difficult in snowy conditions. The February moon is white as snow, and beneath this moon nomads go. Wolves are howling in the night. All of us are ghostly white beneath the hunger moon.
April moon. April's moon is known as the pink moon, named after the pink wildflowers which appear in the US and Canada in early spring. Also known as egg moon, due to the spring egg-laying season. Some coastal tribes refer to it as fish moon, because it appeared at the same time as the shad swimming upstream. Pink wildflowers on the roadside verge. In trees, birds lay their eggs and hatch. In rivers, fish begin to swim upstream, and all beneath this floating moon.
September, the harvest moon. The harvest moon is the name given traditionally to a full moon rising in September, and traditionally it was during September that most of the crops were harvested ahead of the autumn, and this moon gave light to farmers so that they could carry on working longer in the evening. So, the farmer's moon? No. I renamed this moon the migrant's moon. Work on, migrants in the field. I give you late light. Complete the task before I wane again, and grass grows brown, and you must return.
November moon. The first of the winter frosts historically began to take their toll, and winter begins to bite. Call me now the silver moon. as silver ice creeps across your water and reflects my coldness. December moon. The honesty moon. Now you see me, now you don't. That moment of clarity between festive decorations and the moon.
My 13th moon. To be called the clutter moon. My saddest moon. Given all the plastic in the ocean, and with climate change happening because of us, we are polluting even beyond our given Earth. Even beyond our Milky Way, Earth's clutter somersaults and flies. See the trucks and garbage from exploration, modern meteorites in ancient skies. Now COVID, which has widely spread. So many people sadly dead. But the planet, in my view, is cleaner than it was when you were doing all the bad things that you do. That was 6 of the 13 poems included in Savannah and Her 13 Moons by Shaun Traynor, read by Gilles Madden, Costa Chard, Shane Noon, Celeste DeVasey and Aidan Casey. Thank you.
Right, good. I think we're back. I hope everybody enjoyed that. If you would like to get your own copy of Savannah, or if you'd like to buy one for somebody else, please get in touch. You can order a copy through our website, which is www.riversmeetproductions.co.uk. Clearly, I'm not very good at the whole advertising thing, but we'll repeat that at the end. And there's plenty of time if anybody wants to buy one as a Christmas present for someone to get them out before Christmas by first class mail. We're going to move on at this point. I hope everybody enjoyed hearing the poems. We're going to move on to look at the work of our first published author at Riversmeet. In the run into this, Richard's going to talk very, very briefly, first of all, about what made us decide to set up the Riversmeet Press, or indeed what made us set up the whole Riversmeet project, and is then going to ask Jan a few questions. I'm delighted with us this evening about the development of her book Formlight, which was our first publication. So, Richard, if you want to just kick off by talking a bit about the Riversmeet as overall.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. I just want to say, first of all, I'm delighted, honoured, and a little bit scared to see that Shaun is actually listening to this and watching it. If I'd known, I'd have told you what I really think of him. It's also, I just want to answer Patricia's question from San Francisco. I'd say a little bit more about the visual content and how the book was designed. Roloff, the designer, is not well enough to join us this evening, but my understanding is that what he wanted to do was produce a design that, if you look at the book, you'll see that each page is the same design, in that it's got the moon on one side and then the text on the other. But as you work your way through the book, the colouring of the moon slightly changes, as though we're moving from the darkness of the spring and the early part of the year through the summer, through the brightness of the summer, and then on into the darkness of the winter and the autumn again. And every time I look at the book, I just think it's beautiful. It's a beautiful little book. And I'm so delighted to hear the 5 readers read from it so well. I want to say, as Maureen said, I would say a bit about the setting up of Riversmeet, because we've ummed and ahed about this for years, And I want to say two things. One, about how we came to the idea of what would drive Rivers Meet forward. And it really comes from a passage at the end of, and this is horrible self-promotion, from the end of a book that I wrote a while ago. And at the end of the book, Frederick Douglass, the great American emancipationist and abolitionist, has climbed up a tree with a Fenian in our back garden. And they're looking out over the river. And this is how the passage goes. And it explains, I think, a little bit about the ethos behind Rivers Meet. So Eamon MacDonagh points upstream towards a house Frederick Douglass can just see in the gloom, standing on a spit of land between the two rivers. They tell me that it's called Rivers Meet House, MacDonagh says, because the man who built the house thought that it was where the two rivers meet. He thought that he could stroll to the bottom of his garden and look down on his mastery of the world. But the currents flow deeper than that, and they do not merge until further downstream. His arm sweeps down the river, drawing Douglas's gaze to a point directly before them. There, he says, that's where the rivers meet, when the tides are gone out. And ever since writing that, I've been interested in the idea that if you pull two streams together, you generate something much bigger. So we have directly in front of our house two rivers, the Exe and the Clyst, meeting each other and then turning into this extraordinary huge estuary. And one of the things that we wanted to do with Rivers Meet was capture the idea that if you pull two things together, great things can happen. So we wanted to pull art and political writing together. We wanted to produce beautiful books, but we want to produce books that have something to say to the world. We wanted to talk about the relationship between the past and the present. I'm absolutely committed to the idea that we can learn about the past. We can learn useful things about the present by looking at the past. And also that I'm very committed to the idea that being local doesn't mean you end up being provincial. You can be local and still have a reach into the rest of the world. And 2020 paradoxically gave us the chance to do all of this because we were stranded, and we've developed I think 4 strands to the work on the website. One is that we've not been able to do any theatre work this year. We were meant to do a play in London earlier in the year that disappeared when the theatre was closed. So we've turned some extracts from that into short films. We've turned some monologues and some short films onto the website as a way of keeping the work moving. We produced 2 books, one right at the end of last year before all of this started, and then Shaun's book during the year. We have a blog on the website which has a number of guest bloggers beginning to appear on it. We've just posted a piece by Tansy Hoskins, an award-winning journalist, which we're absolutely delighted to have. And last of all, we have the Slow Learning Project, which is a project which attempts to give people the opportunity and the time and the space to sit and really read a book slowly together. So we're reading Ulysses together at the moment, and we plan for it to take a very long time, till at least June of next year, and we've already been going for 2 months. So have a look at the website. Tell us what you think. Please come back to us. You know, we want to build a community around the project, around the website. If you have ideas for things you want to see us beginning to work on, please do. Now, Maureen Casey's going to introduce our first book from this time last year, when it first appeared. We're having a relaunch of Stormlight to acknowledge the quality of the work in it. So, Maureen, over to you.
I think it's actually Richard. I think it's you that's that's going to be asking Jan a couple of questions first. So I think I'll be reading from Stormlight in a few minutes, but I think you and Jan need to kind of have a little chat about it first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were going to have the reading first. I clearly can't read the schedule in front of me.
I love it that you're fighting over talking about my book. That's
it's good to know one.
Delighted about
Jan,
that.
when we first met, rather longer ago than either of us would like to remember, I knew you as a political activist rather than as a writer, and you've come to writing some way down the line. So I have two questions for you. One, really, first of all, about how you relate your writing to your political activity.
Well, first of all, I also had a working life alongside the activism. So I was a teacher, I mean, a grunt, i.e. I was never going to go up the teaching hierarchy because the activist life was too important to me. And a lot of that was in the peace movement to stop the war, or most recently, No Glory in War. Before that, there was sort of cultural work on the Free Museums campaign, which we won. Then work in my union. And I think being at work and having a child, it's through our children that we met, actually. I mean, they're now knocking 30, aren't they? So that's how long ago this was. Grounds the politics. That it's not out there in a vague netherworld of how we want things to be. It's very grounded in the real world. The writing was, I would say, brewing. I think it was sort of fermenting, and I knew that whatever I was involved in, I thought this would be a good story. It's grounded in truth enough, but I can do this with it. And then many years later, it would turn up on the page as a story. But at the time, I might think that, park it, and then when time comes to write it down, with the clarity of recollection, would show whether it would make a good story or not, if it felt enough, felt important enough to me. So, three things. I suppose it's mum, teaching, activism, and the writing percolating through.
Thanks, Jan.
Okay.
So a slightly different question, I guess, which is to tread on a little bit of delicate ground with you. Your first book came out rather later in your career and your life than many another young writer. There it is, Fugues on a Funny Bone. First published 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And 11 years ago.
Well, this was published at 60, when I was 60. This was on my 70th birthday, pretty well this time last year.
Yeah, I was working towards the numbers.
Get on with it.
I want to ask you, because so much of publishing these days is dominated by the cult of youth.
Yes.
How you feel about being a more mature writer?
Well, when I was 18, I really wanted to be going to Oxbridge or a top university to do English literature and be a writer. But the background wasn't right. Doesn't matter, the background was rich and interesting in all sorts of other ways, but it was not the sort of background that you did that from. But in fact, how I feel now as a writer with what I've done is as good as if I'd done that. But I've just had a different life. And it's been a life full of experience and campaigning and meeting different people and so on. And had I done the hothouse thing like Zadie Smith did, which, she's a wonderful writer. But I do wonder if the youngsters have had enough of a life to write about.
Thanks, Jen. Well, thanks for those short answers. If anybody has questions they'd like to put in the chat, we can come back to Jan later. But now...
Can I add here, Richard? Sorry, can I add here that through the activism, a lot of it was cultural, especially around the peace movement. And I was working with people like Harold Pinter, Alison Kennedy, Adrian Mitchell, your good self at times. So I was putting on these giants, I was putting these people onto the stage or into film premieres or whatever. And something was rubbing off because they were there because they were also activists, and there was this kind of an honesty between us about the relationship between art and political activism. Great. And I thought, well, if I can work with these dudes, I can do it.
Thanks, Jan. Charles Harris is asking in the chat pane, Jan, are you going to read an extract?
And Maureen is going to.
Charles, the answer is no, Maureen is. So let's move on to Maureen Casey reading an extract from Stormlight.
Right. Well, I'm delighted to be reading an extract from Jan's book, Stormlight, which is called Beyond the Coin. and perhaps afterwards, if we've got a couple of minutes, Jan might tell us what generated this story. Very high heels, I note, calves straining in flesh-coloured tights, and that little black dress at 11 in the morning at a Balliol lecture, or the Trees and Bees facilitating seminar, as she calls it. I'm Karen, she says, looking nervous, for despite her master's degrees in creative entrepreneurship from both Oxford and Harvard, this is her first performance in the heart of the beast. She smiles at her captive audience and turns on her PowerPoint. Image after image of smiling humans in their contextual situations. A man in the row behind me mutters, "Power corrupts, but PowerPoint corrupts absolutely." I turn my head. It's the elderly judge in his weekend leisure wear of white linen jacket and chinos. We'd peered at each other's badge labels during coffee and croissants at registration. I assume that Karen hears too, as she glances at the rescue remedy poking from her open Louis Vuitton handbag, squatting on the floor by her lectern. The younger academics and NGOs will enjoy this, I think, and so will the sprinkling of people from the charity sector. Although the woman from the Left Book Club, biro poised, smiling, looks sussed in another way. It's the judge and the Don in his tweeds sitting together that intrigue me. The Don, I'd noticed, was from classics. Are they trees or bees? I wonder. They've probably been infantilised by their public schools, so this shouldn't bother them too much. Do they realise that Karen has been sent here, just as they've been? That they, the old guard, know that Karen and her ilk are the coming people. People who organise seminars called Trees, the rooted institutions awaiting their fertilisation from bees, opinion formers, movers, shakers, activists. I guess that if they were going to hang on to their committee positions and funding, they'd have to sit through quite a lot of this kind of thing. Karen shares the ins and outs, twists and turns of creative entrepreneurship, giving examples of new tractors for the pumpkin harvest in Illinois and the job losses, sadly. Then that artist's community relations with prairie farmers as he wrapped an entire 100-mile fence in plastic sheeting, wrecking bemused cattle breeders' boundaries. Sadly. She says, sadly, a lot. Divide the pie, expand the pie, she says, spreading her hands. Most of us shrug, including the judge and the Don, as neither law nor classics can help with this one. Beyond the coin lay ethics, she shares. Your rivals in negotiation, whether it's for your job, land, livelihood, or money, have feelings too. A point of view. The centre of their own universe. That beyond the coin lay those priceless human considerations. But avoid at all costs, she adds, shaking her head. The diversion of the humanitarian. For that was for another of her clients, a security to ponder. They were trees and bees. For people barely alive lay beyond their coin. In fact, they lay in Manu, just off the Australian coast, and she and her ethical, entrepreneurial business had trained its senior management team. They, in turn, had trained hundreds of unemployed, male and female, manuans, in a spirit of equal opportunities, to be prison guards. But that place is a refugee holding place, is it not? Barks the judge, without putting his hand up. Well, yes, but holding places have to hold them, answers Karen. But It is a prison, no, adds the Don. Sneaking a look at her rescue remedy, Karen shares the dreaded 5 words of any management seminar. Now, turn to your neighbour. What? Mutters the judge, flicking a lizard eye at the Don. Eh? Says the woman from the Left Book Club, her smile vanishing. I want you to arm wrestle, says Karen. The trick is to get all of your knuckles touching the surface of the table at the same time, so that you both win. Impossible, says the woman from the Left Book Club, looking at me, hoping I can see that I will be her partner. Right you are, says the Don, taking the liver-spotted hand of the judge. Fuck you, says the judge, grasping the hand of the Don. Arsehole, replies the Don. Sort your own funding out, says the judge, as the back of the Don's hand slams against the desk. Thank you, Jan. Stormlight, just to do the quick advertising thing again, Stormlight is also available from the Riversmeet Bookshop, along with Savannah. I can have both of them up on screen now. www.riversmeetproductions.co.uk. I'm sure if you can't remember that afterwards, I'm sure the lovely people at Bookmarks will be delighted to send you in our direction. But with that, I'll just look at the chat that's coming through. There's been a couple of questions come through in relation to moons, first of all, very much about what led to, as I said earlier, what led to Shaun deciding to write this for his granddaughter. I don't know whether a family member can perhaps put us right on that one, but also why the decision to go for 13 moons, and what was the 13th moon? Why is the 13th moon so special? Now we've also got a question for Jan. What are the pros and cons of being an activist and a writer? How do they work together, and do they conflict?
They're both pros, because PROS, not PROSE, nice pun, because one vitalizes the other. And sometimes a bit of political work, especially if there are a lot of arguments, is so dispiriting that you just need this extra bit in your head to make some sort of fantasy about it, or weave it into a story, or or even replay how it could be. So it makes the activist less zealous, no less committed. I mean, no less politically engaged, but it does give that sort of an echo chamber to the brain to deal with that. And of course, then writing later, you've got this subject matter. And it's like Wordsworth said, not that I'm comparing, but that poetry was passion recollected in tranquility. A lot of these stories are a strong experience reflected in tranquility. But I do want to thank you very much, Maureen, for that reading. You did a great job of it. You got the nuances, because you get the irony and the humour and the contradictions in that world of management and phony stuff, especially when it's around human rights. It somehow gets refracted into something else in big business. But that was a nice example of activist work flipping into something else, because I was instrumental in setting up the Left Book Club again in this country. It was around in the 30s and 40s, and me and some other activists got it going again. So for some reason, a Balliol course manager contacted Houseman's Books, the Radical bookstore, and said, would anyone from the Left Book Club like to go to this seminar, Bees and Trees? And nobody did. So I was, Jan, would you go? I said, all right, a day in Oxford's okay, and it might be useful. In fact, it wasn't, other than I got this short story out of it. Now, like Hitchcock, sometimes I appear in my work as a little cameo. So I am the woman from the Left Book Club, but I'm not the narrator. I'm just sort of one of the characters that the narrator notices. But I did have to arm wrestle with the judge. who was just apoplectic with boredom. I know that sounds like a contradiction. I don't know if you can be. Yes, you can. Apoplectic with boredom is what he was we doing this arm wrestling, and he was worried about wasting his time. But it's the mood in the room changed when she started. I mean, Karen started talking about how her organisation also trained prison officers in a refugee holding centre off Manu. That's when it got quite dark, and we thought, no, there's something to say here. And also, I didn't like to mention in the story that the artist who was wrapping up whole fences and trees in part of America was Christo. I quite like Christo, the artist, but there was he was upsetting all these farmers, and this management consultancy worked with him as well. So, the whole thing is rich with irony. And I took notes all the way through it. I just taking notes. People were writing down, drawing their diagrams of how to be a tree, and I just think, yeah, that's funny. Yep.
Jan, you can still hear me? Hear me?
Yes. Yes.
There's another quick question here.
Yep.
Well, first of all, actually, an observation, and I'm delighted to see that that an artist friend of mine, Mia Cavaliero, has spotted that the picture in the background there is in fact the picture of the cover of Stormlight. Do you want to just say who the artist is?
Yeah. One of the joys of an activist life is that you meet some great people. And back in the days of the Iraq War, a dear friend, Ruth Boswell, and Ruth has sadly died, but the pair of us got together over that and met in the Aquarium Gallery, where two artists called Steve and Adam decided to call themselves Harry Adams. So that's Steve Lowe and Adam. Oh God. Anyway, Steve and Adam called themselves Harry Adams, which is one painter, and they couldn't be more different from Gilbert and George in their politics and outlook and liveliness and so on. So their gallery have hosted events that I've done to fundraise for different causes, and now we work creatively together. When I saw these paintings, I thought, can I have one for the cover of Stormlight? And yes. In fact, everything behind me is from that studio. It's L13 Ladies and Gentlemen's Club for the Betterment of Leisure, is what they're called. And Richard, I took you down there once. Do you remember? This sort of. So that's Flooded Land by Harry Adams, and it's massive. I mean, it fills this space that I'm in, and it was meant to be at my birthday party, but we couldn't get it round there. It's very big. This one sometimes reminds me of me. A bit earnest on the phone, a bit daft sometimes, and with a sort of a serious, purposeful, and that was from that studio too.
Couple more questions here. The very naughty Charles Harris wants to know which character you were in that story, and I'm going to answer that for you. Clearly, she was the Oxford Don, Charles. It's obvious. Isn't it? And a more sensible question from San Francisco is
can I say, since Charles is here, I can't overemphasize the importance of being in a good book group. Sorry, not group that you read, but a writing group. And there are four of us, Charles, me, and Eve and Charlie, and it really does develop the writing. I mean, they're thanked in both books because you can't write in a vacuum. You do need other writers to bounce it off, and I'm very pleased with that. You're saying.
Okay. Quick question here. This is directed to either Jan or Shaun. So Shaun, if you're still listening to us, you're very welcome to reply on the text for this. Patricia in San Francisco is very keen to know, curious to know, what does it feel like to hear your work read aloud? Do you have a different relationship with the spoken text, and does it enlarge your understanding of your own words?
It's both delightful and humbling. Part of you thinks, oh, what have I done to deserve being read out loud like that by an actor? And then part of you goes, yeah, great, that's me. My words coming back at me. But the weirdest thing was the first time I heard a play read back to me by actors. The first time I saw a rehearsal of the first play I did, which was a short one, in the Post Office Theatre. And that was very weird. That was like being in an echo chamber. And I thought, why do those actors want to speak what I've written down? And then I got into it, and then yeah. Yeah.
Shaun's come back
but
to us.
it's that vulnerability that must go with a writer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not doing the old, you know, I grew up in a cardboard box, often all circular, and, you know, you really do. And I think writers who are too self-assured and who have had all the easy beginnings, I don't think they've got the vulnerability and the edge in their writing.
Yeah. Just come back. People may have seen it flash up on the screen, but Shaun's come back to us in answer to the two questions that we'd asked. At the end of 2019 and 12 moons, I just wanted to do the clutter moon and also mention COVID and see things from a child's point of view. And he thought the readings of his poems greatly enhanced them. Delighted to hear that. We couldn't be more pleased, Shaun. I've also noticed we've got Aaron from Ohio with us this evening. We've got a really international bunch. This is just fantastic. There he is. Fabulous actor from the United States. Just actually on that very last question, and if anyone's got any more questions, if you'd like to kind of just pop them in quickly. Richard, you've got a question.
No. I just wanted to add a little bit to Patricia's question, because I think I have a very similar experience to Jan, which is sitting in a theatre and having the slightly odd experience of hearing people speak words that have previously only been rattling around inside my head. And I learned a very salutary lesson very early on, having written a play, sitting in a room with a bunch of professional actors, one of whom turned to me and said, "You're going to have to rewrite that speech." Why? He said, "There's too many noises in it. You keep going all the way through it," which of course I'd never noticed because I'd never said it out loud. He said, "So can you rewrite it?" I said, "Sure, yeah. When? How about now?" He said, "There's a chair over there." So got banished to a corner of the rehearsal room to rewrite a speech that had too many noises in it. And it because that it's a really useful lesson, I think, because it means now when I write something, I do say it out loud so that at least I get to hear it. The other thing that happens, of course, that happens to me a lot, and I'm sure, I don't know whether this is a common experience, but I sit and watch something that I wrote, and I see other people making sense of it for themselves. And at some point in there, I usually think, "Oh God, did I really do? I never noticed that I meant that." But I actually sat in a theatre once and watched something that I'd written, and about halfway through it, suddenly something happened, and I suddenly think, "Oh God, that's what this is really all about." And I said to the actors afterwards, "That was really interesting. I'd never really realised that was what was going on in that play." And they all just looked at me and said, "Well, it was completely bloody obvious to us, mate." So that sense of the relationship, I think, between what we think we're writing and how we think it sounds, and actually how hearing other people make sense of those words by speaking them out loud and performing around them it's a kind of endlessly fascinating thing for me. So there.
Jan, you've got a couple of minutes to come back on this before we wrap up.
Yes, I'm delighted to see that Shaun is with us. Shaun Traynor is with us, and also to say that I was part of the journey of getting Moons into publication, and hearing those being read was beautiful. And when I first saw the poems, I loved their spareness. There was a beauty in the spareness. There's not a word wasted in them. And on the page they're lovely, but read they're as lovely, perhaps lovelier. But that's the actors, and I'm so glad that Shaun has heard them. I'm so glad that I could be involved in. I should also say that the other aspect of collaborations between writers is that Shaun introduced me to pentameter theatre, and now a lot of us are working on readings and short plays there.
Yeah.
So,
thank you very much. I think I noticed in the comments there was a question about whether we were going to carry on with kind of the audio book kind of aspect to the poems, and indeed to your work, Jan. And I think that's absolutely something we want to explore further. And it'd be lovely to get the rest of the poems read and do something similar with them. I think everybody really enjoy that. So to wrap up, start with a thanks first of all to Jan for joining us this evening. Thank you to Richard for doing all the introductions on behalf of Rivers Meet. Mega thanks to Shaun and his family for their support in the whole of this process and getting this wonderful collection of books launched out into the world, which we've been calling the Moon Launch the whole time, which I think we've enjoyed. And to our readers this evening, to Celeste, Aidan, Shane, Costa, and Gilles, thank you so much for the time and effort that you put into this to produce something absolutely brilliant, and very much so to Aidan, who put everything together and did the editing and I think produced something really beautiful with the poems and the readings. And finally, massive thanks to Bookmarks for hosting this for us this evening. We're so delighted to have been able to do this, and to do it in the run up to Christmas is lovely. We're hoping to be back with Bookmarks in the new year, probably towards the end of February, to do something a little bit different, featuring some of the other bits and pieces that we've been doing at Rivers Meet. But with that, I'd like to thank all the people from all over the world who've been contributing to the comment section that's come in. Lovely to hear from all of you. I hope we managed to answer most of your questions, and I'll finish by thanking very much. Oh, Richard, do you want to say something?
I just want to say just one last thank you, which of course to Shaun, because without him, none of this would have happened. It's also been just an absolute delight to get to know him over the last couple of years, and to just get reintroduced to the work of somebody who's a really fine poet. And one of the real pleasures of this has been to discover again that there are great people out there writing great poetry, and who cares whether the kind of staid academic literary establishment discovers people. It may, it's really important. So Shaun, I just want to say to you, happy solstice, mate, for next week.
Absolutely. And final thank you to Dave from Bookmarks, who's done all the technical support for us this evening, and without whom we could not be here. So we'll finish there. Thank you and good night, everybody.
Good night.